Salt of the Earth Farm Stories is proudly brought to you by Grig Media. Step into the world of farmers from diverse backgrounds across Australia. Through intimate interviews, host Darren Grigg delves into farming practices, traditions, and the challenges farmers face in nurturing the land.
You can have 20% increases in productivity, whether it be lambing rates, wool growth, meat, live weight gain and all that sort of thing by creating a good environment for the stock so they can shelter from the wind, shelter from the heat.
Today, we're talking with Mason Crane, a very clever ecologist who has been exploring nature since his earliest memory. Mason's work has taken him from studying squirrel gliders for his PhD to spending 20 years at the Australian National University, where he helped launch the Sustainable Farms program, helping farmers manage their land sustainably. We'll hear about his journey, including how he brought a city girl to the country and how his community work even led him to become a local councillor. Mason shares his thoughts on balancing farm production with biodiversity and how a healthy environment can boost farm yields by up to 20%. And we'll explore natural solutions like using acacia bushes to reduce parasites in sheep, plus tackling worms naturally. So join us as we chat all things ecology, sustainability, and how Mason is helping both nature and farming thrive. Let's get into it. So we're sitting here today just north of Gundagai, New South Wales. And I see lots of plantings, stacks of birds, some fat lambs grazing peacefully. I'm here with Mason Crane. What do you see, Mason?
Just look at a familiar landscape, I guess, all these hills around Gundagai and look at all the paddock trees out on the horizon, which sort of nice to see, but also you're worried that, you know, in another 50 years, there'll probably be half as many of them. And look across the paddock on our place where we've done some restoration on the hills, trying to restore the paddock trees and sort of get a bit of satisfaction out of that. Then I look into some other paddocks on our place and thinking, haven't quite got it right there yet. A bit overgrazed in some places, you know, might have some weed issues and things that need sorting out, but I sort of do feel like we're getting somewhere, but it's sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back all the time. So it's sort of, you slowly get there, but learn along the way, I guess.
All right, Mason, let's go back to the beginning. Where were you born and what was your earliest environment like?
I was born in Gundagai Hospital, grew up in the middle of town near the lookout in Gundagai, so there was a bit of crown land up the back, which had some wild pine trees on it and I think 1 box tree left on it. And
But that didn't stop you exploring nature up there?
No, we always were up there. At the house there, we had a small paddock, like it was only 4 or 5 house blocks sort of thing, too rough for anyone to build on. We always had a couple of chooks or sheep up there, and as a kid I'd spend all my time exploring there, even when I was very little. Mum always talked about if she couldn't find me, she'd call the dog. And then the dog would come back and she'd see where I was. Actually, one day the dog come back, but I didn't. And she thought, "Where is he?" And I was caught under a fence.
Oh, lucky! Really? Yeah. You're a little kid.
Yeah, I don't remember it. Mum just tells me the story about it. We had that little block there. There was town commons. So my grandmother over South Gundagai used to milk the cow each morning, so I'd go and help her, and Mum was interested in that sort of thing, so she started milking cows on the North Common, so we spent a lot of time doing that. So I was always around livestock and out in the environment. We're lucky. In Gundagai there's a fair bit of crown land with the 2 commons there, so all the town kids can go down the river fishing and run around paddocks there, so that was pretty good.
Do you have any other childhood memories of growing up with land around you?
So my parents split up when I was probably, I must have been in year 4, and Dad went out to work on farms, and so we'd go every second weekend out to a big property out near Adjunbilly here.
Yep.
So that time I'd go to work with Dad on the weekends or through the school holidays, so I'd be in the sheep yards. And when I wasn't doing that, me and my brother and some of the other kids that were on the station there would just go explore in the hills. We'd always just pack a backpack and go explore in the hills and have a little fire somewhere and try and catch fish or yabbies or whatever and just exploring around.
Were they wool or meat sheep?
Mostly all merino up there.
And growing up, I know you had your stint in rugby, and you weren't just a fan, you were out there playing.
Oh, yeah. I loved rugby, and it wasn't until I was 18 that I started playing because Mum never wanted me to play rugby and be a buffhead. She always said, "Not playing rugby." So I played hockey for a little bit. Then I played football. So it took me a while to learn how to play. I think I got most improved 4 times in a row.
That's good.
So it must have been pretty ordinary to start with, or maybe I'm a champion there.
That's it. Well, speaking of rugby, I remember running into you one Monday morning, actually. We were about to start a video, and you were carrying some battle scars from the day before. You kept going back for some more rugby, and you came out of retirement there one day?
Oh yeah, no, I've come out of retirement a couple of times and just played reserve grade with Gundagai. But I think that time you're talking about, we played in a Masters comp up at St Mary's, so that was pretty good. But we played one game against the St Mary's Premiership team from 5 years ago, and when you play in that Masters team, you can wear certain coloured shorts, which means you can't be tackled, or you can be, but softly, or you just wear normal shorts and then you can just tackle, go as hard as you want.
And what colour were yours?
All our team wore the just go as hard as you want. So when the St Mary's boys seen that, they thought, finally we can have a good solid game. But these guys were big fellas, from all different islands around the place, I guess. So yeah, me and my mate, when we got out of bed the next day, I said, "How'd you pull up?" And he goes, "Oh, he's pretty tough." And I remember myself sliding out of bed because I couldn't sit up and just falling on the floor, then trying to get up. It was good fun, but really good fun. But yeah, the body didn't recover real quick.
So after school, you took a leap into ecology. What was it about ecology that hooked you?
Well, when I was in high school, I think from year 10, I was looking at what job I might want to get into, and being a national park ranger was the target. I organised to talk to national parks rangers to find out what course I need to do and what the best pathway there, which was good because a lot of kids don't really know what they want to do straight away. I picked the right subjects, went to uni down in Albury, planned to try and get in at being a discovery ranger to start with, and I did all those plans. But when I did some work experience up around Nanangrow, the property that I used to go out to with Dad, where Dad used to work, well, what happened with that property, the property was bought by state forests to put pine plantations on. The people that were managing it before kept managing it, and Dad was still working it as the pines were going in. And he came across a team of ANU scientists, so led by Dave Lindemeyer, that were doing some research out there. And Dad had a yarn to the field guy at the time and said, "Do you take any students?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we'll take some work experience people." So I went and did some work experience with that, and eventually I worked for National Parks as a discovery ranger and got a job as a ranger filling in for a bit.
While you're still studying?
Well, just as I finished.
Yeah.
And then at the same time got offered a job with the ANU to do some work up there, and then for 20 years I worked for ANU after that.
Yeah, I want to get into that shortly. And it was ecology you studied, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was environmental management, so looking at ecosystem management and cultural heritage management.
All right, so before I got here, Mason, I tried to sum up the meaning of ecology. Can you give me a go at explaining it? Ecology looks at relationships between species, such as plants, animals, and microbes, and how they rely on and affect their surroundings, like air, water, soil, and climate. Can you add to that, or how did I go?
Yeah, I think that's all right, but it's all about how things interact, and when you look at it at that broad picture, it's very complex, but it's actually, what I like to say, it's like a complexity of very simple relationships, but there's just lots and lots of these simple relationships, and if you can understand, then you can understand how things work, but there's just so many.
So I'm fascinated by squirrel gliders, and I believe you did your PhD on these incredible creatures. What's the story behind your research on them, and what did you uncover that's so important for conservation?
I was lucky during my work that I had the opportunity to do a PhD. We were studying reptiles, birds, and possums and gliders in agricultural landscapes and how they can exist and how we can change our farming practices to help conserve them, or sometimes not change, do things the way some people are already doing it. to conserve wildlife. But squirrel gliders were very difficult to detect. They're pretty shy, hard to find in our traditional spotlight method. We seen there was an opportunity to study them there in a bit more detail. And I was particularly interested in them because where I was finding squirrel gliders wasn't where I expected to find them. I thought it had to be a good big patch of bush, very diverse, but actually it was in the paddock trees is where we were starting to see squirrel gliders. So we started a radio tracking study. I think we radio tracked 24 individuals over 4 months.
To visualise it though, did these paddock trees have lots of other little trees around them?
No.
How did they get there and move around?
Well, squirrel gliders can glide up to 70 metres roughly. They like to glide 50 metres. And if you actually look at the paddock trees around the landscape, there's a lot of areas where they're within that range. So there is actually a fair bit of big habitat there. The problem with the paddock trees is not much recruitment, not much young trees coming up. Yeah. So it's good, might be good habitat there now, but unless something changes, that habitat's slowly getting eaten away.
And these big old paddock trees will often have lots of good hollows in them and hidey spots.
Yeah, so the hollows are one thing, but also just large trees are really important feeding sites as well. So the study that I did looked at a couple of things. We looked at home ranges, we looked at their preferred feeding areas, their preferred denning places. We also looked at some of the things that impact on paddock trees like wildfires. But we found that being a large, big canopy tree, particularly lower in the landscape, not far from drainage lines, was a really important feeding site for gliders. So they were in often that yellow box country that's down not far off the creek. And
feeding off sap and things? Was it?
Mainly insects. Yeah. And you could notice it at the time we did the study, it was pretty dry and the insect activity was really concentrated around the creek lines. So whether it be moths or lerps and that sort of stuff. So they were really focused on that until things flowered, and then they'd go wherever the most blossoms were, especially where there's ironbark or white box, them heavy flowering trees. They'd move often over a K to set up another home range based around that resource. And then once that resource finished, so once the flowering stopped, then they moved back down to those gully lines, which was sort of their core habitat, I guess.
It's quite interesting how they move around at night time feeding on different insects and different trees. I've had some motion sensor cameras out there of a night time watching them move around, and they're fascinating little creatures.
Yeah, no, they're great to see work. One time spotlighting there, I had one of those big goat moths, the bardy grub moths.
Yep.
I was spotlighting and was looking at this glider, and then one of the moths landed on my chest, and this glider come flying down the tree. And I thought, here we go. So I was hoping it would jump on me, but it sort of just hesitated at the last minute. But he was ready for it. And then I was thinking, that would be a serious feed for a squirrel glider, one of them bardy grub moths.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point in life, it's around the time when we're able to call you Dr. Mason Crane?
Well, because I was working at the time, I think 2005 I started the PhD. And I did it part-time, but I think it was probably 2017 I graduated, so took a while, but when I did all the work on the PhD was sort of when we weren't busy doing other things for work.
Yeah. So after your PhD, what did your work life look like then?
Still the same as it was probably at the start. So for 20 years, I was pretty much just a field officer.
That's right, with ANU.
With ANU, collecting data for these large studies and sort of managing these large studies. I think as time went on, we had more input into the research and a bit more work helping analyse the data and interpreting it.
And one of your most impactful contributions has been the establishment of the ANU Sustainable Farms Initiative.
That was a good initiative. It's still going. It's something that we'd been doing probably right from the start, which we always tried to do. Like when we worked with landowners, it was all on a voluntary basis. So we made sure that we gave back to the landowners, because so many times research projects are fairly short term. The researchers stretch for time and often they'll promise to give data back to the landowner, but often that's forgotten about.
Yeah.
So we were really focused on making sure that landowners got the information, what was on their place, and what our results were. So David Lindemeyer, who was the boss, is a very prolific writer of scientific papers, but also popular books as well. So he did a lot of work on that, which went back to the landowners. We did lots of participate in lots of field days and that sort of thing. But we weren't really funded to do anything like that. It was just additional. We had an opportunity to talk to the Potter Foundation. And
Yep.
The Potter Foundation seen what we're doing and thought it was a great way to go to make sure we have on-ground scientists working on farms. We could tell the stories, what's happening on that farm, and also getting the landowner's perspective was probably going to be a powerful way to sort of communicate the benefits of conservation on farms. And I think it worked really well.
And the rewards were there for the farmers and landholders.
Yeah, well, the landowners, like, they never got that we worked for, the land that we worked on, you know, they never got any payment or anything like that, but they were very keen for us to keep doing work there because they appreciated the knowledge that was being generated. And then I think there was a hunger for that information more broadly across the farming community. So this way we could sort of do more on that.
And so just going back to after your studies, you met someone very special. And who is this person?
Oh, Miriam Walker was. We met at university.
Yeah?
Yeah, so that was...
She's got similar interests?
Yeah, Miriam did the parks degree that I did down at CSU, but also did the ecotourism degree. Yeah, so we formed a bond, I guess, then.
Yeah.
And Miriam moved up to Gundagai, which was a bit of a change from coming from Melbourne. And now she's out here at Coolac, living on a hill next to the Hume Highway, which was a bit more of a change again.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, she worked with Landcare for a few years once we come up here, and then done various jobs with the council, doing economic development, and now working on LLS.
Yeah.
Doing stuff with the rivers and stuff. So, yeah, she has the same interest. And
Exciting program she's working on now. And how many kids?
3 kids.
Do they have similar interests?
They do, but I think they probably don't show their enthusiasm too much, or they might get dragged out. They've always been dragged out, checking traps down at Jervis Bay for small mammals and that sort of thing, which they enjoy. But, you know, like anything, if you do enough of it, sometimes it becomes a chore. They're interested and they're very observant. They see things, which is good. A lot of kids probably don't see.
So, Mason, you've been also a councillor at the Gundagai Shire Council. What
Yeah.
led you to take on that role, and how did it shape your perspective on the intersection of farming, ecology and community?
Yeah, well, I guess probably before we had kids, like, we were very involved in community stuff. Like, I guess growing up in Gundagai, the whole community is sort of like a family, I guess. So, you know, we all work on things together. We try and improve the economy, the environment around Gundagai. They were the sort of groups I was interested in, conserving the heritage. And, you know, I was going to a lot of things anyway. And then I thought one year, well, council has the opportunity to do a lot of good stuff. So I thought, I'll give that a go. And for 8 years I was on council until the forced mergers, which has been a bit of a disaster. I think there was always a thought from the state government that we've got too many small councils and it's inefficient, so we're just going to merge them all together and it'll fix that issue. But, you know, there's a lot of issues with local government, especially in rural areas in particular, that, you know, you've got a very small rate base and a very limited way you can generate income to pay for all the services that the council provide. I just think sometimes some of the probably bureaucrats from the bigger cities don't understand that the person per hectare out here is very low, and it's got the same amount of, I guess, infrastructure in terms of roads and stuff that you might have in much larger areas, but you just have a smaller rate base. So rural councils are very reliant, always going to be reliant on grants and support from the state and federal government, and merging them together doesn't change that main issue. Once you get bigger and try and represent a number of different towns, it takes the community out of it, it just becomes a bureaucracy.
That's right.
And I think while staff are still good, they are a little bit different because they don't see themselves as working for the community as much. It's more that they're working for a government agency.
Yeah, that's well said, actually. I can see that. So today you're living on this magnificent property just north of Gundagai with your family, and walking around with you just earlier this morning, it's a fascinating blend of farming and conservation. How does integrating biodiversity with a fat lamb enterprise work in practice?
Yeah, well, I think you need to have biodiversity if you want to run a successful sheep farm. I think, like your tree lines that we plant or the paddock trees are all shelter for the stock, and a lot of work that was done on like research done back in the 80s and 70s demonstrate, you can have 20% increases in productivity, whether it be lambing rates, wool growth, meat, live weight gain and all that sort of thing by creating a good environment for the stock so they can shelter from the wind, shelter from the heat, and just not use all their energy just trying to deal with the harsh environment they're in.
That 20% message is hard to get across to farmers, isn't it? If they've got to lock up some land or lose some productive grazing land, to get that shelter belt and that biodiversity message, it can be hard to get across to some farmers.
Yeah, I think it sometimes takes a certain season, I guess, when people see animals getting heat stressed. It might have been 2019 or a little bit before that. We had a run of really hot days, and you could see the sheep were, panting out in the paddocks, really getting underneath the trees. But the issue was the nights didn't cool down, and these sheep were keeping hot for long periods of time. And talking to a few blokes that work in DPI, and they had actually thermometers, internal thermometers on some of these sheep through this period.
Interesting.
And they couldn't cool their body down. So if they couldn't cool their body down, they weren't eating. It was causing abortions of lambs. It was making rams sterile just because of this real big heat wave we had and the inability for them to cool down. I guess that's a dramatic period. It was a very dry time, but that's at worst. But the rest of the time, if they're out panting and too hot to eat, well, they're not growing, are they? So it makes common sense.
And I think there's a whole new episode on biodiversity on farms with you, which I'd like to record with you at some stage. But when it comes to protecting your environment here on your farm, what specific steps are you taking?
Well, I guess we're trying to work out what we should be doing. One thing we know is that we need more trees in the landscape. Our paddock trees are disappearing. So we've done a couple of projects based on the Greening Australia whole of paddock restoration idea, where we'll do 4 strips of trees, and you leave a 50-metre gap or greater to create just for pasture, then another 4 rows of trees. And the idea of that is to sort of replicate that paddock tree, but also making sure that we still have pasture areas.
Yeah.
And the work that Greening Australia did showed that you actually don't lose any grass pasture growth when you do that, because you actually gain growth in them areas that are protected from the trees, particularly in normal years and wet years. In dry years, it's a bit neutral, or it might be a little bit less grass if it's a really dry year, just because the trees are starting to use it a bit.
So would you be looking at north-south plantings or east-west?
We're sort of, what's limiting us is planting to the contour, I guess.
Yeah.
So as soon as you start ripping down the hill and that sort of thing, it's first of all hard to do with the bulldozer.
Yeah.
And secondly, you might channel erosion around. Because we're on a steep hill here, like the traditional way that Greening Australia do it through direct seeding, you couldn't really get a direct seeder up there.
Yeah.
So we run a dozer to do a rip line like a traditional tree planting, planted the eucalypt so you could get the spacing right, because I didn't want them too thick. You wanted it to still be fairly open even in the tree lines, and direct seeded, Greening Australia direct seeded acacias and other shrubs in amongst it.
Why acacias?
Acacias, well, I think acacias are really important for the birds and that sort of thing. There's a lot of other benefits to them, but mainly from biodiversity point of view, we want to have that shrub layer in there, and it'll be interesting to see how well we can maintain that with introducing grazing back into those areas. We'll crash graze and then try and leave a recovery period, but sometimes you've got to leave a fairly long recovery period for the new seedlings to get above the sheep. We'll have to work that out yet. There is little trees, little acacias reseeding up there, but they often get chomped before they get up. But it might just take them a bit longer, but we'll keep trialling that.
So are you fencing off these little corridors?
No.
Right.
They're just grazed. And, the acacia's good for the sheep as well. That's another feed source, and there's a few studies that show some of the acacias are good for reducing parasite loads in sheep. So if they're eating the seed pods and the leaves of some of these wattles, like black wattle, Acacia mearnsii, they have a natural insecticide in there because they're always battling insect attack, and that can have an effect on the worm loads in sheep. which is an issue. One of the main issues with grazing sheep at sort of fairly high densities here is worms.
Right. And you said before you're losing paddock trees. Why are we losing those?
Well, nearly all the paddock trees that you can see when you look across this landscape are trees that were there pre-European settlement, and they were probably left there because they were a nice big shade tree already. So they're probably a big old tree then. So most of them probably hundreds and hundreds of years old. So they're susceptible to fire because they often have hollows in it. So even a small fire could go through and get up the root of the tree and then burn them out. A study we did when I was doing the squirrel glider stuff, I thought I'd look at the impact of just wildfires on paddock trees. Looking at paddock trees through the southwest slope that were affected by fires, we found on average you lose 20% of your paddock trees with any wildfire event.
Because of the hollows, the fire can get up inside the tree?
Yeah, it's just they get up inside the trees and burn the tree out.
Oh, that's interesting, because otherwise a grass fire wouldn't have the intensity of a bushfire, so it wouldn't be as hot. So if it didn't have the hollows, the tree might survive a lot easier, wouldn't it?
So it's just because they're old, they've got little cracks and hollows and stuff like that, they can get up into it.
Well, that's a wrap for part 1 with Mason. But don't worry, there's more to come. Next week, we'll dive into Mason's fat lamb enterprise and how he's selling direct to the local butcher. We'll also talk about why having a solid farm plan is key, and how something as simple as fencing off an area can be a huge farm benefit. We'll explore managing conservation on private land, Mason's role with the Biodiversity Conservation Trust, and even hear about making tea from weeds. Yep, you heard right. So be sure to tune in next week for more with Mason Crane. In the meantime, keep your hands dirty and your spirits high.